We're going to go live first.
All right.
And I'm going to start recording.
All right, so we're good to go?
We're good.
All right. Hello, everyone, all of you that I can see and those that may be here that I cannot see. You are in a meeting of the Oregon Water Resources Commission. It is May 31st, 2:30. We have one agenda item today, and but it's a we have a couple hours to cover this because there's a lot of material here. It's an informational item, so we won't be doing any voting or making any decisions, but providing feedback on the legislative package that the department will be moving forward. So do we have anything? I mean, this is kind of weird to just launch right in, but I don't think we have anything else to cover before we get to our presenters today, who are Lisa Snyder, Danielle Gonzalez, and Bryn Hudson. And if you guys want to come on up here and virtually speaking and introduce yourselves and get started, that'd be great.
Chair Reeves, I might just start off by introducing this team to you all. Bryn is going to walk us through the details here, and Bryn is our legislative coordinator, but she is joined by Danielle Gonzalez, who is our policy section manager. Those two are going to be on the front lines for us on a lot of our legislative work. So legislative concepts, bills, and helping with budget, that legislative interface, they are the team. But I also, many of you, if not all of you, have met Lisa Snyder, who is our budget guru, and we rely heavily on her, more heavily than she probably wants, frankly, to help us grind through all the numbers associated with our budget. She does a lot of heavy lifting in terms of taking the ideas that we come up with, translating them into numbers, and through this the state system, which has its own language, if you will. But between the three of them, very happy to have them helping us move these important issues through and this process through. And so I think with that, if Danielle, maybe you want to introduce yourself a little more thoroughly. I think the other, Bryn, have you introduced yourself to the commission in the past? I don't know, but if you haven't, why don't you follow Danielle?
Yeah, well, thank you, Director Byler. So Danielle Gonzalez, so Chair Reeves and the commissioners, I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to talk with you today. I am the policy section manager for Water Resources Department. I started with the department in March, so I'm still learning as quickly as I possibly can. I come from a background in economic development and specifically in infrastructure development. So that's what I worked on prior to coming to the agency. And so it has certainly been my pleasure to work with this team. So the policy section team, just so you're aware, does the legislative pieces, but also works on the public records request and rulemaking, as well as media and agency-wide communication. So it's very wide-ranging. And so the work that Bryn has done here for the legislative concepts, as well as the team on the legislative concepts and the policy option packages, we're happy to present to you today. So I will pass it over to Bryn, and I'll answer any questions if I can help. And Bryn and Lisa, please go ahead.
Aries, member of the commission. Hello, Bryn Hudson, legislative coordinator for the Water Resources Department. Most of you have seen my face before, and you'll get a lot of me today. So I will be brief in my introduction. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hello, Lisa Snyder. I am the administrator for Administrative Services Division. I think I have met most of you in previous meetings. Happy to be here and answer any questions that you need.
All right, so I will go ahead and share my screen so we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and kick things off. So I'll give a quick overview of kind of the budget and legislative timelines that we all should be aware of, and kind of what we're up against between now and the legislative session. So I'll do that really quickly. The budget development process typically occurs within 3 distinct and iterative stages. So first we have the agency request budget, then the governor's recommended budget, and then the legislatively adopted budget. So I think this is a bit of a review for all of you, but we're basically in the agency request budget, or the ARB development phase. And this phase essentially includes requests for new investments, which is basically what we call POPs, or policy option packages. So when I say POP, that is what I'm referring to. So I will just note that, the road to the final budget, the legislatively adopted budget, is a long one. And we have several timelines that we are required to abide by along the way. So the first one that I want to flag is coming up the first week of June. We need to have a general idea of the POPs that we want to include in the ARB, as well as the priority of each by the end of the first week of June. So that is one thing we will be asking for feedback on this week, is basically the prioritization and general content of the POPs that we have in front of you today. There are also some similar timelines for legislative concepts as well. So our LCs, our draft language, are due the first week of June as well. And after that, we have one opportunity to revise that draft language before those concepts are finalized and filed for the 2023 legislative session. So the first week of June is a big week for us, but those are the kind of major deadlines that we are running up against right now. So that's a quick high-level overview of the timelines. In terms of what else you can expect today, we are going to start off by walking through the policy option packages. And we'll do things a little bit differently today. We will pause before we go into legislative concepts for commission input, as well as public comment on the POPs. We just have a lot of information to get to, so it may be best if we just kind of break that information up a little bit, and then we'll go into the legislative concepts and then provide opportunity for commission input as well as public comment. And I will note that if folks are not available at the time that we do public comment for policy option packages, you are more than welcome to share public comment at the end of the commission meeting during that 4:30 time slot as well. But just to kind of organize things and facilitate things a little bit better, that's kind of what the plan is for today. So as a reminder, we need to lock in and submit the final titles and priority for each POP during the first week of June. So thus far, we have solicited a variety of input from WRD staff, external partners, and several commissioners on sort of how we should be prioritizing the variety of investments in the agency. So we have worked through all of this feedback and essentially tried to prioritize what you will see as we work through this all based on foundational operational investments in the agency. So basically, what does the agency need to keep the doors open at the end of the day, and existing commitments. So those POPs will be the POPs that you see in the top tiers of attachment 7. And that's kind of what we will be following through today as we work through all the POPs. So again, in addition to the feedback that we gathered from external partners and WRD staff, we also tried to balance that with, the need to have to keep the doors open and existing commitments that the agency has already made. So again, attachment 7, it lists out the current POPs. And what we have done is we have broken them out into different tiers based on those prioritization variables that I previously said and our feedback that we've received. And so basically today we are requesting feedback on POP prioritization. So, do the tiers make sense? Do some things belong elsewhere? And just the POPs more broadly. So what's included, what's not included, what else should we be considering? So we will come back to this slide in the end, but I will be walking us through each of the tiers of the POPs and pausing for input after each tier. And as we go through each of these are some of the questions that I have up on the screen that I want everyone to keep in mind as we consider the entire POPs list. So basically, you know, as you listen to all of the tiers and as we get towards the end of our POP discussion, is there anything that's missing, that's a critical need for funding that we have not included? Which of these POPs that we're going through do you think need to be top priority POPs? Which ones maybe aren't as high priority? And are there any policy option packages that we may be able to consider removing from this list as well? So I am going to just jump right in and work through it. So I will pause. Director Byler, Raquel, Danielle, anything you want to add before we just jump right in? Perfect. All right. Seeing shaking heads. That's my favorite thing to see. All right. So we are just going to jump in and start on tier 1. So as a reminder, attachment 7 follows this structure. So if you want to have that in front of you while we're also going through this, that provides a little bit more detail as well.
Bryn, can I interrupt you just for 1 minute?
Absolutely.
I want to find out whether we should be interrupting you. If we have questions on an individual POP, maybe you already covered this. No, I guess that was about public comment. Do you want us to jump in and ask the question, or do you want us to try to hold our questions until you've gone through all of the POPs?
Cherry, that's a great question. So what I was envisioning is I would describe each POP within each tier. And then after I wrap up tier 1, I would pause for questions, great. Feedback, comments, and just so we can do it by tier to kind of, you know, organize it a little bit without making you guys hold it all until the very end. Does that sound right?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Awesome. Fabulous. All right, let's go. Let's jump right in. So draft tier 1 has 4 POPs in it. The first one is POP J, and it is around ensuring fiscal responsibility and timely accounting. So this package makes an existing limited duration accountant 1 position permanent, which essentially just enables us to improve fiscal transaction processing timelines and provide better support for accurate and timely fiscal reporting across the agency. POP V is our state match dollars for the Harney Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. So this is a federal match to cover 20% of the costs required for voluntary and permanent retirement of groundwater rights in the Harney Basin, which is essentially meant to slow the rate of groundwater level declines in the area. POP W is around investments in the integrated water resources strategy and facilitating interagency coordination work. So this POP proposes to make the limited duration IWRS coordinator position that we received in the 2021 session permanent. So the lack of resources in this area has really limited our ability to track progress on the implementation of IWRS recommended actions, monitor emerging issues, and gaps for future updates, as well as actually implement actions. Additionally, there has been a formed water core team with a variety of executive level water agencies to help work on the IWRS, the water vision, and to facilitate interagency work and coordination. And one area that this group has determined as being in need is staffing for this water core team. And so this position would also help facilitate meetings and work to develop and coordinate work products across agencies on these larger high-level integrated water resources work. This package would also include $100,000 for things like website, publications, communications, as it relates to stuff like the IWRS. POP ZD is paying for ODFW fish-related expertise, as well as addressing revenue shortfalls. So for those of you who have been following us from the very beginning, this is actually a combined POP with POP ZD and ZE. So we were all the way in the Z's and adding on extra letters, but we ended up combining a couple POPs together to create this one. So basically this POP provides funding for the costs incurred by the department for ODFW fish-related expertise work as a part of water rights and extensions processes, which are ultimately used to complete reviews as well as the backlogged fish persistence work. Additionally, We also get contract dollars from the Parks and Recreation Department to work on state scenic waterways. And those contracting dollars have not really kept up with staff costs. So this funding proposal also provides some backfill for 6 existing partially funded positions with general fund. So that's kind of a two-pronged approach for this POP. There's the fish persistence work and then the backfill costs. So those were the 4 POPs in tier 1. I will pause for any questions, comments, input, or guidance that you may have on this, that any commissioners may have.
Let me see, where can I see on an iPad? If maybe people should just speak up commissioners, if you have questions, because I can't see hands up. I can't see you physically, and participants. I'm sorry, I'm on an iPad and I'm not really sure where the hands up function is on here. Do any commissioners, let's give this a second. Any commissioners have questions? Well, I have a question. I'll make it quick. On the last POP ZD, just make sure I want to make sure I understand. This is water resources covering the cost. In other words, the funds will go to ODFW and to parks to compensate them for making their staff available to do work that we need done in our own programs. Is that accurate?
Partially. So the first
Okay.
half is correct. So
Okay.
The fish persistence work is money to reimburse ODFW for their staff to help us out with fish reviews. The
Okay.
second half is we receive contracting dollars from Parks and Rec. So we receive money to do work for them for scenic
Oh, I
waterway.
see.
However, that funding is not kept up with staff costs. So this basically provides that backfill
Okay.
funding to help with those positions.
All right. Great.
So when
Well-
the POPs are given to DAS, will the tiers be shown as priorities?
Commissioner Lee, could you repeat that, please?
Yes, when you present the POPs to DAS, will you have the tier 1 and the tier 2 so they see those priorities?
That's a great question, Commissioner. So what we will ultimately need to do is we will need to lock in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down for all the POPs that we have. So basically how we have grouped things today is based on, we've clumped them based on what we see as being the highest priority ones. And so any feedback from you all about, maybe what deserves that number 1 spot, or maybe what doesn't deserve that number 1 spot, or number 2 or number 3, that type of feedback would be immensely helpful. So we will ultimately need to start nailing down what's our number 1 POP, what's our number 2 POP. And these tiers kind of are our first attempt at grouping our high priority to, I don't want to say low priority, but less high priority.
Okay. I just want to let you know I've done some experimenting and I now see how to see whether someone has their hand up. So I don't see any commissioners with hands up at this moment. So unless somebody speaks up right now, I'd say we should go ahead and move on to the next tier.
Great. All right. So tier 2, our first POP is POP I, and it is around investing in information technology modernization and strategic planning. So investments are needed in our IT departments to support the expanded use of IT resources, as well as analyses for planning for modernization efforts. So this funding package essentially includes a variety of positions to allow for increased oversight requirements around strategic planning, information security, analysis and strategic planning that we need in order to prepare to focus on modernization efforts in future budget cycles. It also includes some management support for IT staff in that area of the agency as well. Pop H is another federal match pop. So this is a package that includes biennial cost matches required for open evapotranspiration work, a cost match for roughly 10 to 20 agrimet monitoring stations, and 5 SNOTEL sites all across the state. So this is federal match dollars, not necessarily work for us, but cost matches for us to work with the federal government on data gathering platforms, basically. Pop M is our increasing document accessibility and staff efficiency pop. So this proposal includes $200,000 to hire a contractor to scan various water rights and transfer files. So basically taking our paper files and making them digital. The package also includes 1 public records request coordinator to focus on fulfilling public records requests, modernizing the way that we handle public records requests, and ensuring ultimately that we are providing quality service to Oregonians that are seeking public records from the agency. Pop U is funding and support for investments in feasibility studies, water projects, and wells. So this package requests additional funding to be awarded as grants for the department's existing grant programs. Additionally, funding programs have been added to our purview. So we received 2 new domestic well funds during the 2021 legislative session. So this package also requests 1 additional position to provide more timely service to our customers, to basically include some administrative capacity in that area to ensure that we can actually get money out the door. Pop ZG is basically a placeholder pop. So this is an American Rescue Plan Act carryover funds pop. So some of the funding that was authorized into the department during the 2021 session last year through ARPA funds will need to be carried over through the next biennium, and we're still trying to pin down exactly what that price tag is going to look like. But we have left a pop open and available to be a vehicle to carry forward some of those funds that we've been unable to spend. So that is draft tier 2. I will pause for any questions, comments, input, guidance.
Okay, Commissioner Mall, you have a question?
Thanks, Chair Reeves. Thanks, Bryn. 2 questions. One pretty straightforward. You mentioned on tier 1, I think it was a 5-to-1, maybe a 4-to-1 NRCS match on that stuff in Harney County. You know what the match is, the federal match is on the, which one is that? U?
I think maybe H is what you're looking at.
Yeah, sorry,
open
H.
I don't off the top of my head. I think it's a little different for all of them. I want to say it's a 50% for open ET, but I will need to probably connect with our surface water section and get back to you on that.
Not critical. I don't need the answer back. I guess I would just say that in any of these pops that go forward with that federal match, we really highlight that before the legislature, because it's an area that the commission has encouraged staff to really look at in years past. And I appreciate you doing that. There's a lot of federal money. And I think this is the one that we got the extra letter from Larry O'Neill today supporting. And I very much in favor of this approach, but particularly that whatever we can do to leverage federal dollars, I appreciate it. The other question I have is perhaps more procedural that maybe Raquel can attend to in that $28 million Pop U. Is there any way within this discussion of the POPs to get at some of the questions we had 2 meetings ago about discretion for the Oda Verde staff to flex with budget changes around grants? As of the last meeting, we had still uncertain answers on that. And I'd like to know whether or not there's any pathway to get them that 5% flex or 10% flex or whatever it is. If this is the place to attack some of that rigidity, I want to encourage staff to do that. I guess I don't really need an answer to that. I just want to encourage it if this is perhaps it's not within the budget, but maybe it's a place just to drop a note.
Yeah, commissioners, for the record, Raquel Rancier, Deputy Director of Strategy and Administration for the Oregon Water Resources Department. I think if I'm recalling what you're getting at is pertaining to existing grantees and whether we can, if they received a grant for some amount and now with inflation, is this where you were going, Commissioner?
That is where the conversation started. That's correct.
Yeah. I need to follow up with our staff on that because I think that has to do more with the grant agreements. I don't know if there was a specific request that we needed from the legislature. So I'll have to check in with our grant staff on that.
The last report we got sounded like it was they felt bound by the rules was the way I read it. And so again, it's been a while, but again, more than I'm not looking for the answer again. I just want to highlight what I think for really effective, as Bryn described, timely grant making, the more discretion and flexibility that staff can have to a point. I'm not talking about, willy-nilly, but some discretion, I think, would really help advance the program. Thanks.
Yeah, Commissioner, it'd either be set out, it would depend on either our statute, our rules, or the grant agreement. And I don't know, I'd have to do some inquiries with our staff to see if there was flexibility there. I don't think the budget request is necessarily going to give you that flexibility.
Okay, let's see. Looks like Commissioner Lee has a question as well.
Yes, on POP ZG, I was wondering if some of that money can be applied against these other requests, or if there are certain restrictions that would not allow that.
Commissioners, that's a great question. Again, this is Bryn Hudson, Legislative Coordinator for the Water Resources Department. Lisa, I'd lean on you to chime in, but it's my understanding that typically what would occur is the ARPA funds that have already been allocated to specific projects, that's what the request would be, to carry the funding over to the next biennium to be used for the initial authorization rather than for a new project. So that is more or less, I think, what we had in mind. Lisa, please chime in if that's incorrect in my characterization of what the carryover funding would be.
Nope, Bryn, I think you got it down perfect. It would be carrying over for whatever work was not completed in this biennium, using those funds again next biennium.
Thank you both.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. I did have one question myself about the POP H. And I'm remembering, at least I think I'm hopefully correctly remembering, that a few years back we were hearing about concern about big federal cuts to at least the SNOTEL program, which got me wondering, have we seen, is this, I guess I don't remember talking about this match in previous budget cycles, and I'm wondering if this is something new, or do we always, is this always part of our POPs in order to keep this program going, or if it's a new development?
I just saw Raquel come on, so maybe I'll kick that one to Raquel.
Okay.
Chair Reeves, Commissioners, that's a great question. I don't think we've had SNOTEL requests in our recent POPs, as far as I can remember. I know that we have seen an increased interest internally, as well as with other stakeholders, in having more SNOTEL stations, similarly with Agrimet stations. And so I don't know that we have had a common practice of funding SNOTEL sites or Agrimet stations, but I think we have funded some in some cases. I know we funded some Agrimet. I'm not sure on SNOTEL, but I think given our desire to see an increase in those, we are this go around proposing a match for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let me just take one more look before we move on, see if I see any other. Okay, I do not see any other hands. I think we can move to tier 3.
Great. All right. So draft tier 3. We'll start with POP L, which is providing quality service through employee development and retention and implementing project and portfolio management. I doubt this will be the final title, as is a mouthful. And this is also a combination of past POPs. So we lumped in POPs L and N together just because it made more sense to kind of lump these two. So this package essentially includes funding for training for staff that hold professional registrations needing continuation credits. It provides funding for staff to grow and develop in terms of their professional skills. So this can include things like facilitator training, project management training, coaching up managers. It also includes 2 positions to help out with project and portfolio management. So these positions would basically help integrate project and portfolio management across the agency and help kind of train up staff on best management practices and kind of create consistent approaches to project management across the agency to ultimately better manage our project portfolio as we've seen it consistently grow over the last few bienniums. So this is more of a modernization in terms of how we handle project management across the agency. So that's POP L. POP P is centering equity and agency programs, policies, and processes. So we are proposing to fund 2 positions that are responsible for leading the agency's efforts in advancing environmental and racial justice and diversity, equity, inclusion across the agency. This will also increase our capacity to reach underrepresented and underserved people, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color and rural communities. POP R is for supporting improved government-to-government coordination as well as tribal water solutions. So this is basically a tribal liaison position to assist with government-to-government coordination as well as supporting the agency and developing relationships with tribes to engage on tribal water issues and engage tribes on work that the agency is doing. POP ZB is the continuation of the Columbia River Umatilla Solutions Task Force Phase 2 work. So this was funded in the 2021 by legislative session. Oh, excuse me. And so this is basically a continuation of that funding to support that work. POP K is around driving performance improvement and accountability through internal audits. So that basically this POP is just creates a one-time, or creates a one full-time internal auditor to basically keep the department in compliance with state audit requirements. We are in discussions with the Watershed Enhancement Board regarding sharing this position, but I just want to flag that those conversations have not been reflected in the pricing that you see in front of you right now in POP K. So with that, I know POP 3 was, or excuse me, Tier 3 was pretty meaty. So I will pause for questions, comments, feedback, anything of that sort.
Okay, thank you, Bryn. It looks like Commissioner Mall has his hand up.
Thank you, Chair Reeves. Thank you, Bryn. Under POP P, I'm curious, Bryn, or anyone in the department, maybe this goes up to you, Tom, similar to that, I mean, I guess it was K as the potential shared position with OWEB, but I'm curious, is the department getting any sort of higher level guidance so that, for example, OWRDs dive into equity training and policies is not independent of and just parallel to what OWEB or ODF or others are doing? Is there any centralized sort of path being followed, or is it all hey, this is important, you all need to do it, and you're sort of having to do it on your own from an agency perspective?
Saw Raquel come on, so yeah. I'll kick that one to her too. That's my cue.
Tom, did you want to go first?
Sure, Raquel. I'd say it's a little bit of both. For the record, Tom Byler with the department. There's been a lot of coordination among agencies through the governor's office and the Racial Justice Council. And so those are points of contact that agencies can work with individually. but also in more recent months, there have been coordination meetings, not really intended for coordinated action, but I think it has kind of a secondary benefit of everyone kind of listening in to the direction and guidance from the governor's office and the RJC. And so I think that at its heart, agencies are kind of have their own responsibilities to carry out, and we certainly all have kind of our own unique range of interests that we work with and issues that we work with. And so there is that element. But I think that there's opportunity, and probably I could foresee some coordination opportunities growing over time as agencies like ours, which are really still in our early stages of working through these issues around engagement in this area. As we get more experience and more sophisticated, more practice at it, I think that those coordination, interagency coordination opportunities are going to present themselves more and more.
Chair Eves, Commissioners, I would add that DAS, in addition to, so the governor's office has provided some lead support on this, which Director Byler talked about. DAS is also providing some support from the standpoint of they have the Chief Cultural Change Officer at DAS, and they provide us with, kind of statewide announcements of some of the trainings that they offer. And then in addition, there's like the DEI action plan, for example, which is something that was developed at a statewide level that then agencies are kind of expected to go forward and, implement. And that's where, there's high level guidance. The specifics, though, are what each agency kind of needs to figure out in terms of how they proceed. There's also some state laws that have recently been passed, not necessarily specific to training, but other equity actions that the agency also needs to be implementing as well. We are doing our best to occasionally coordinate, check in with what our other agencies are doing. Some of the bigger agencies have a lot more resources, and we've been able to talk with them about what they're doing. But at the end of the day, until we have staff people to really focus on this work, it means that it is, while we are trying to thread it throughout our programs, it means we're all a bit in that learning stage and trying to do it as we do all of our other workloads.
Yeah, thank you both. I guess I would just, because it is so complex, it's so layered, even things like common language across different agencies. I know there's the state plan, but common language or the lack thereof in terms of implementation becomes a real challenge. And when for example, by parallel, how the Watershed Council world and the Land Trust world and some of the other groups have gone about it, you can see where groups that have done it somewhat independently may have done some really interesting progressive things, but the lack of synergy, the difficulty of synergistic efforts, because people literally are speaking different language sometimes around the same things, can be counterproductive. And I feel like, maybe the what did you call yourselves? The governor's cabinet on water, the working group that got together every couple of weeks. There's an opportunity, at least for those agencies that intersect in water, to share some common language and things like that. So I guess I would just want to encourage that. Thanks.
Oh, let's see. I do not see other hands up on this tier. I think we can move to tier 4.
Fabulous. All right. Again, Bryn Hudson, Legislative Coordinator. We're going to move into the draft tier 4. And so we'll start out with POP T, which is moving to solutions through basin and complex issue coordination and expert facilitation. I will flag that this is also another combined POP. So our old POP S has been lumped in to POP T. So this package invests in 3 complex basin coordinators to basically help see progress on solutions to those issues that are most complex in specific basins, and will be responsible for coordinating internal staff, other agencies, and stakeholders that represent Oregon in conversations around groundwater and surface water resources across the state and across basins. This package also includes the special assistant to the director. This position has been historically unbudgeted, but the work done by this position is very important, and they essentially represent the agency on the most complex and controversial water issues. So this package proposes to make that special assistant to the director position budgeted. And it also creates a budget line item for the department's base budget to contract for facilitation and public engagement process expertise. And this will essentially just allow us to be more strategic in our efforts to address not only complex basin issues, but also complex policy issues, specifically in situations where we might be an interested party and might not be a neutral party when it comes to these tricky, complex issues. So that's kind of where that expert facilitation fund comes in Pop T. Pop F is around reducing water rights processing backlogs. So this proposal allows for the water right and transfer sections to keep working to reduce processing times and allows for continued progress on that protest backlog that we've got. So this basically extends 7 limited duration staff, and it also adds 1 person to basically be responsible for providing outreach to applicants who have recently received approved permits or approved transfers to basically educate those folks about the terms and conditions of their water right or their transfer, to work to kind of stomp out those maybe inefficiencies and questions that may pop up later on down the line. Pop A is our Adapting to Climate Change and Drought Pop. So this package proposes 6 new positions that focus on climate change, drought response, mitigation and adaptation, focusing on improving our agency's in-stream programs, as well as working with cities, districts, and others to promote water conservation, including identifying potentially vulnerable water systems and working with those systems to basically improve their resiliency to water scarcity and drought. In addition, these positions would also focus on artificial storage and then recovery and artificial recharge projects as well. So that one's got a lot going on in there. But that's Pop A. Pop Q is around providing policy support to advance agency program modernization and solutions to water challenges. So this POP proposes, and this is Pop Q, and this POP proposes to add 3 water policy staff positions that will basically allow the department to have a dedicated policy professional assigned to each division of the agency, with the exception of the administrative services division. And what this will do is it'll basically just allow for more specialized focus on division-specific issues, programs, and projects. And then these specific positions will be responsible for interfacing with program staff and external stakeholders alike, as well as the public, to advance policy development, as well as rulemakings. Pop ZA is our POP around providing financial assistance and accessible foundational data for water planning and coordination of plan implementation. This is another POP that will likely be shortened because it is a mouthful to say. And that is because this is a combined POP between Pop ZA and the old Pop ZC, which is a data POP. So again, we're getting to the alphabet soup of how long our POP list was. But this was a POP that was combined with another. And we will get to our legislative concepts in a bit, but this POP is intended to be paired with our water planning legislative concept and would provide funding to support various types of planning in Oregon. So the package includes 1 planning coordinator who will work with existing staff to launch and operate the program. And it will also add a new position to provide basically grant administration support for this program. The package also includes $1.5 million for multi-purpose planning grants. So basically that's the funding piece to support the new funding program that we are proposing. And it also provides $500,000 in grant funds to support places that have already finished up the development of their place-based integrated water resources plan and are essentially moving into the coordination implementation phase. So what that $500,000 would do is it would basically support coordination efforts of those already established place-based planning groups to help them kind of move their projects into the implementation phase. The package also requests additional resources for staff who will be tasked with developing water supply analyses and tools that are foundational to supporting future planning efforts. And so what this will basically do is it'll dramatically increase the accessibility of the data that we have in terms of water supply and information that's essentially going to be very necessary for Oregonians as we plan for our water future. So there are two pieces. There's the funding piece and then there's the data piece in this POP, and it's kind of a lot. And tier 4 was, again, pretty meaty. So I will pause for any questions, comments, or feedback on the tier 4 POPs. Chair Reeves, you are muted.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Lee, did you hear that?
Okay.
Yeah, I saw that you had your hand up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Reeves, and this may be a question for Director Byler. In 2021, there was legislation passed that provided funds for folks who were doing a project to do pre-project work with the community. Would that fit into POP T or in some other category? Was looking at infrastructure projects, municipalities and others.
Chair Reeves, Commissioner Lee, if I might step in, I think what you are referring to is House Bill, I want to say it was 3293.
Yes.
And so that bill authorized us to essentially take funding from existing programs to utilize it for that purpose. So that is not specific to POP T. I will say that our planning POP, which, Bryn, I don't know if you've gotten to that one yet or not. I think that's ZA. Is that correct?
Yes.
So ZA is the one that actually includes a proposed additional funding for community kind of engagement and capacity building is part of our planning POP. But the legislation that was passed in 2021, House Bill 3293, it essentially says that if an agency has an existing program and it specifies which agencies, I believe it's like 5 agencies, that they can then use that portion of that funding for what the purpose that you're talking about, Commissioner. We postponed work on House Bill 3293 because our priority at the moment is launching the what we're calling the WRF program, which actually has nothing to do with wharfs. It has to do with wells. It's the well construction or well repair, replacement, and abandonment fund. And that is in light of the fact of the significant number of wells that we have had go dry in the state. The additional funding that the legislature provided us as part of the December special session and the direction from the legislature to ensure that we were getting those funds out towards folks that needed the help. So our first focus is on getting that program launched. We are intending to work on 3293 in consultation with other agencies, because each agency has a role to play in implementing that bill. What I don't know yet is we just had one of our staff in our grant program resign. And so we are going to be down a staff person, and we have yet to, that just happened last week. So we will have to assess how that may change our plans for the various implementation of the other funds. So hopefully that answers your question there, Commissioner.
Yes, thank you.
Hang on a minute, I'm checking out any other commissioners with questions? Do not see anybody here. I had a question about, I guess it was about ZA. Well, maybe I should hold this. I'd like to talk at some point about the relationship between all of the planning potential items and the statewide, the regional state-supported planning, the regional table, basically, and the outcome of that effort. But on this particular one, I also wondered about coordination of plan implementation. I'm assuming that we're not talking here in this item about funding specific implementation actions, but somehow assisting with, well, what are we talking about, I guess? What would be coordination of, maybe just an example of what would be coordination of plan implementation?
Chair Reeves, members of the commission, that's a great question. So when we say implementation coordination, what we are referring to, and this is based off of feedback that we received from almost universally from the planning groups, in that in order to keep groups together and moving forward from the approved plan to actually shovel-ready projects, there needs to be some resources to keep the groups together in order to allow work to continue. So when we say implementation coordination, this can include things like facilitation support. So funding to pay for a facilitator to keep the group together, keep meetings moving forward. Could include things such as stipends. This is a long and lengthy process, so it can include things like stipends to keep folks invested and keep folks coming back to the table to basically keep plans moving forward. So you are correct. This is not for pipes and shovels. It's more for the facilitation, keeping groups together so they can move from planning to implementation, which still requires resources and time for folks to participate in.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, it does. It's helpful. I think that's all my questions on this slide. Any other? I don't see any other questions, so let's go to the next tier.
Perfect. All right. Tier 5 is a little more manageable to look at. So we've got 3 in draft tier 5. The first one is POP G, and this one is pertains to updating and maintaining surface water availability models. So with this package, we are proposing to update the statewide water availability model over a 6-year period, which will essentially deliver more accurate and up-to-date seasonal and monthly water budgets for basins throughout the state. So this will basically come with a variety of staffing investments for program and project management to basically coordinate technical and research activities and refining the tool and refining estimates. The proposal also includes an increase in the base budget for stream gauge operations to maintain our current network, plus additional field and hydrographic staff to operate and process the associated data that results from those new stream gauges and existing stream gauges. POP B is around improving water management, and this is really a field focused. So this proposal increases the number of water masters and assistant water masters in a variety of strategic basins across the state. It also adds 1 executive manager for the Klamath and Lake County region. And it also reclasses a variety of NRS 3 water masters up to an NRS 4, and which is primarily just a response to the increased workloads and complexity of issues that many of our water masters are facing really across the state. This also includes a reclass of our professional engineer in our dam safety program. It reclasses that professional engineer 1 to a professional engineer 2. And there is a typo in attachment 7. That reclass appears under POP BA. That actually belongs in POP B. It got left behind when we split those 2. So that's POP B. And then POP O is around increasing public engagement through communications. And this proposal includes an additional communications professional to help focus the agency on the use of digital communications. So things like videos, social media, newsletters, graphics, in order to reach and engage a broader group of Oregonians. And this proposal also includes a budget, an actual communications budget for that communications team to help out with things like graphic design contracts, printing, public service ad buys, video production, basically kind of providing the meat to our communications department and actually giving those folks something that to actually, like a budget to actually be able to help broaden our communication capacity. So that is tier 5. I will pause before moving into tier 6.
Thank you, Bryn. Checking, checking for questions from commissioners. I don't see any. On to tier 6.
All right, on to tier 6. So I'll start out with POP BA, and this is the assessing levies. So as I mentioned when I was talking about POP B, this used to be one POP and we split it into 2. So this is basically just around assessing levies across the state. So this package would provide funding for one engineer to identify, inventory, and inspect levies across the state that pose a risk to people or property, and that are not under the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer program. So right now we don't have an inventory right now of all of those levies, and so this package would essentially work to fund to create that inventory. POP D is around facilitating collaboration and data to improve understanding of Lake Eber challenges. So this package is still in the really early stages, and it requires further discussion and refinement with interested stakeholders, both state stakeholders as well as local parties, as well as interested tribes. So there's a lot more engagement needed on this front, but proposals are outlined in the longer attachment 6 document as well as attachment 7 that are basically focused on additional data collection that will provide critical and bolster existing data sets for building and calibrating models to be used for management purposes in that area. So some draft ideas that we are kicking around include things like funding for observation wells, new stream gauges, more agromet and snow-tell stations, things like LiDAR flights over Lake Eber. So those are some of the ideas we're kicking around. But again, there's still a lot more work that needs to be done on this POP in particular. POP C is around studying springs in the Deschutes Basin. And so this package provides funds for existing staff as well as a new hydrologist to engage with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Department of Environmental Quality, as well as stakeholders to identify springs in the Deschutes groundwater study area. And basically the study will complete an inventory of springs, including habitat and ecological values in the context of water supplies in the basin. POP E is around increasing data accuracy and data entry to improve data availability. So funding for this package will essentially allow the department to start the process of cleaning up our data, including points of diversion and water right data associated with Senate Bill 1602, which was a bill passed back in 2020, and it related to the Forest Practices Act. And we were implicated in some of that in terms of providing point of diversion information to the Department of Forestry. So this funding package would help bolster up and get that work started. In addition, it provides funding for data techs to review and enter legacy well report data into our well report information system, and then work to kind of integrate that information with other databases at the department and with other agency assessments such as DEQ water quality assessments. So kind of working to harmonize all of our groundwater information in terms of wells. So that's kind of what those positions would be doing as well. And then there's also some funding in here for assistant water masters to provide the field aspect of all of that work in terms of verifying points of diversions in the field, as well as well log location information as well. So that is tier 6. So I will pause for questions, comments, or feedback on tier 6 POPs.
Okay, let's see here. It doesn't look like we have any questions on tier 6, Bryn.
Fabulous. Okay, so we're going to move into, and Raquel, before we got started, mentioned that there are there's 3 POPs that we've been able or that we have shaved down basically based on feedback from stakeholders and existing priorities at the agency that we basically felt like maybe they don't need to move specifically this session. So the three that we are no longer pursuing, or we are proposing to no longer pursue, are POPs F, X, and Z. So POP F is around the Klamath Scenic Waterway and general scenic waterway work. POP X is around the Regional Water Planning and Management Work Group. So this is the funding for that one position that's currently supporting that work group. And then POP Z is around Basin Specific Implementation Fund. And there was a clear divide among stakeholders, leading us to believe that this is definitely an area that there needs to be a lot more work on before anything moves forward on this. So that's kind of why we ended where we ended on those POPs. So I don't know, maybe it makes sense to just pause and see if folks have any feedback on maybe thumbs up, good job, thumbs down, add it back in, or any other questions on these before we really launch into the discussion and larger feedback of the POPs.
I do not see any volunteers for that. And I think you're good on this one.
Great. Okay, so as I mentioned, we came back to this slide. So now that you've seen all of the POPs and their tiers and kind of everything in its entirety, I'd like to pause and zoom out before we go to public comment and see, what input you all might have on sort of where we have proposed making investments and how we have prioritized those. So, as you see kind of the entirety of the POPs list, is there anything missing that we need to be considering? Out of everything you've heard, are there things that we should be considering as high priority? Are there things that should be maybe low priority or lower priority than how they have been categorized? And then additionally, is there anything that could be removed or that you see as maybe not being a priority for this biennium? So just as a reminder, I will pull up the table of contents in attachment 7 so you can kind of jog your memory and see everything together as to what's in draft tier 1 all the way through draft tier 6. So I will stop talking. This is really an opportunity for you all to kind of share your general thoughts based on what you have heard, and then we can go to public comment.
Thank you, Bryn. You did a really nice job of, reducing those to a manageable thing to digest. So let's see. We have some commissioners and Director Byler. Maybe we start with Director Byler. Tom, did you have something to add relevant to the conversation, the structure of the conversation, or?
I do, and I'll be very brief. I just want to say that if you feel like you're swimming a little bit on this, get in line. We've been feeling the same way, but I wanted to orient folks around the staff report where we talk about the criteria that we've used. And it is really difficult to juggle the different elements and that help shape how we tiered this. And we also got feedback from stakeholders. So we're kind of mixing a whole lot of things like, the integrated water resources strategy, the department's 5-year strategic plan, the unfinished business, whether an item would, if it's not funded, would it create a hole that we would have to plug otherwise? There's just a lot of criteria that goes into this. So if you're feeling a bit at sea around this, and we understand there's a lot here, and we did our best to try to order this in a way that made sense, looking at those various criteria in addition to getting the feedback. So just wanted to frame that up for you and help you understand some of the thought process that we were struggling with as we pulled this together. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Commissioner Wolf, let's start with you.
Yes, I was just wondering maybe why the improving water management POP B was rated relatively close to the bottom when, well, in my region, you know, it's just been not that many years ago that we got a water master, and it seemed to me, from my perspective, some of the things that are going to help us maybe create efficacy in our water planning in the future at the ground level, so that the information in a lot of these areas we're trying to get our hands on is more accurate and updated, would be greatly facilitated by adding water masters and making sure that the things that are on paper are correct, and that the uses of the water in the water right is actually what's occurring on ground.
I might step in, Commissioner Reeves. Again, for the record, Tom Byler, Commissioner Wolf, thank you for that question. I think Raquel may have mentioned, and maybe Bryn did too, that there's not a big gap in terms of priority among these different tiers. There are a lot of things that if we, let me put it this way, if we had our way, most of this would be in tier 1, which would render it meaningless, of course. So we really struggled with that. We recognize your point and agree with you that having boots in the ground is really important. I think as we are moving more and more to an era of scarcity around different parts of the state, having those people in the communities helping to manage the resource, helping to distribute water, helping to problem solve is extremely important. I think part of what why that item is where it is not a reflection that it's unimportant to us, but it's really about maybe I would say offer 2 factors. One is we have some other competing needs that we see as being pretty important and also underserved and being under capacity for quite a long time that we want to bring to bear. And when you combine that with some recent investment, we've actually had quite a significant increase in our field staff presence just in the last 2021, both the long session and in the December session. So when we juxtapose kind of balancing these other needs that have not been as fully resourced with the field services presence, which has had pretty significant investment just recently, that also kind of influenced our where we place it in the tiers.
Okay, and do you have any sort of premonition of, well, we think tier 1 and 2 might get funded, or where the state's going to choose to cut this off, or is that completely would be completely speculative?
It would be speculative at this stage.
Thank you.
Reeves, commissioners, if I might add to that, is a reminder, this is the agency request budget, right? So this goes to the governor's office and they get to essentially choose from here. They may choose very well all of our tier 6 pops and none of our tier 1 pops, right? So that could happen, right? It could also happen that the legislature chooses it. So it's important to be mindful of, this is a way for us to signal what we think is higher priority. At the same time, if it is not important, it's not on this list, is what Tom was referring to. And that is why this prioritization, when we went through it the first time, there was a lot of highs. Everything was in the high category, right? And that's what makes this really difficult. But if we talk a little bit about, if you look at tier 1 ones, for example, a lot of those are ones that we are actually either continuing something. So for example, J, V, I, all of those are continuing an existing position, right? Or funding program. And then ZD is filling a revenue gap. So just in tier 1, it's not necessarily about something new. It's about continuing existing things or filling in existing gaps. If you then go into tier 2, it's a little bit of a mix, you'll see. But if you continue on down, you'll also see in tier 3, We still have some of those programs that that are carryover programs, or that we are going to be required to do something, and that we won't have the funding to do it unless we put forward a request. So, and then we know that there's all these really important things that we need to be doing, right? The integrated water resources strategy calls those things out. We know that climate change is creating some incredibly difficult drought conditions for us. That POP ranked very highly with many of the stakeholders, and we think it's important. We also have all of these other things that we know we need to get done as well. So hopefully that just provides a little bit of perspective. And certainly one of the other things we weighed was if it was a newer program, or if we just received an influx of a lot of resources in that program, that may have changed where it was in the ranking, even though we think all of them are important. So hopefully that helps in terms of additional context.
Thank you, Tom and Raquel. Commissioner Smitherman?
Oh, thank you, Chair Reeves. Well, a lot of work obviously has gone into this. And like you were saying, all of these things, all of these items are a priority. I just wanted to comment. I don't really have a question, just a comment, just to reiterate, I think, the importance of POP-W and other planning and efforts, because we do spend a lot of time planning for these projects, and it can be difficult to make that move from planning efforts into actual implementation, and having someone there to facilitate that and help continue to keep that moving forward, to make sure that those infrastructure and those improvements and everything that came about in that planning portion of the project actually gets moved forward. And so I think that is definitely a very important piece in this budget that you've included. Also, definitely on POP-H, I think that we need to have more data to help us make stronger decisions going forward, especially with drought and climate shifting in our areas. It's even more important to have that data available, and in investing in our information technology modernization, because we can't do any of that work without having updated IT and able to process that data. I think that if I'm looking at all of these things, I think adapting to climate change and drought, it is something that has been on everyone's mind. Maybe not in the last month, maybe a little bit in the last month, but we've gotten a break in the weather. But it's something that seems to be trending more in Oregon, as having more drought years, more limited water resources, and so I think that looking at that and having the in the POP for this year, for this budget cycle, is a good idea. So I appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and just thank you for everything that you've done.
Thank you, Commissioner Smitherman. And Commissioner Lee, you have your hand up?
Yes, I wanted to also support Commissioner Wolf's request, because I think that in order to be able to implement planning and all of the efficiency methods we're looking at, including climate and especially drought, we do need people on the ground to give feedback and take part in that process. So I really felt that, I guess it was B in Tier 5, should be moved up to a higher priority.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. Does any staffers want to respond, or shall we just move on and get all the input and wrap up later?
Chair Reeves, I'm unable to speak, obviously. I would just say that I appreciate that feedback, and my earlier comment and Raquel's was in response to Commissioner Wolf, just helping you all understand what our thought process was. If you all have ideas on rearranging the order of this, it's very helpful for us to hear it. So we really appreciate those comments.
I have an idea about rearranging that I wanted to add. Although it's, am I ready to say, I think you should move X project? No, don't mean X. I mean, some specific project lower. No, I mean, that's this impossible task that everybody's put to, but I would move Pop A higher up in priority. I mean, climate change and climate change and drought readiness are crucial for us and for the state, for the people of the state. And I have thought for a long time that the state, it doesn't have to be in the Water Resources Department, but the state needs somebody whose job it is to be constantly planning for, thinking about, and trying to put into place measures to address drought. And I think that, the cycle of it's very important. We have a lot of focus on drought when it's happening, and then we tend to drift away from it, from the focus when it's not. It might be partly a function of the fact that we don't have a person, I don't think, a specific person in the state whose sole focus with the, obviously this would have to be with the help of staff from maybe many agencies, whose sole focus is drought preparation and resilience. So that, but that package includes a lot of other things that are crucial and dovetail into drought, or maybe drought dovetails into them. So like I said, I don't know whether this position, this program that I have in mind necessarily would need to be in the department, but I feel strongly that it needs to go forward in some way in this state's budget. Maybe it's in the governor's office even. So a pitch for taking the concepts that are in that POP and figuring out a way to make them a priority for the state in the budgeting process. I just say that. I'd also strongly support the federal match for the data, the Open ET agreement, Snowtel. And then there was one other. Oh, I know. I guess I just wanted to talk maybe, and Tom, maybe you can help me with this. I'm trying to figure out how, I'm thinking about how to think about those POPs that relate to planning in light of what might come out of the regional table, and just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Chair Reeves, Commissioners, again, Tom Byler for the record. Chair Reeves is mentioning we have a number of items related to water planning here, including a legislative concept that we'll talk about. And Chair Reeves is aware, and I think we've apprised you all of the work that's been ongoing with the Regional Water Planning and Management Work Group, which was legislatively created. We're working kind of to help staff that effort. There is a lot of overlap potentially between what the regional work group may end up doing or wanting to do in terms of its recommendations and some of the things that we're offering up here. But I don't know, I guess, where the regional work group will go at this point. And so the reason why we are bringing these ideas forward is because we think it's important for us as an agency in our strategic investments that we make, that we continue to have a functional planning arm that we have as part of what we do. And if we don't bring forward a legislative concept and associated funding this in 2023 during the long session, our planning program will go away because it sunsets at the end of this biennium. So we feel a responsibility to keep that ball in the air and to move forward with a proposal in that regard. But at the same time, we are fully aware that this work group is kind of working on similar ideas. And what I think could play out is that we'll see later this year because we have time. We'll see what progress the work group makes. We'll see what momentum they have, and if there's a strong overlap with what we're proposing and what the work group is proposing, we can talk then about, well, what's the appropriate vehicle to try to move this idea forward. I expect in 2023, there's probably going to be multiple ideas put forward through either through the department and the governor's budget, or through this work group, or through legislators who have had a continued strong interest in this. So I think in this case, it's not bad to have options going forward. And we'll just continue to try to, I appreciate you raising this, Chair Reeves, because I think it can confuse folks that, why is the department putting this forward when we've got a work group that's working on kind of similar area. But again, we think that it's important to preserve our options going forward, not knowing exactly where the work group is going to go. And my hope is that they'll, through the work group process, we'll have some really good ideas come forward in 2023, and we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about them when we get into the long session.
Yeah, I mean, that approach makes sense to me, Tom, in light of what's going on in other arenas working towards this planning outcome. Well, I had one other question. We don't have, I don't think, although one of these, or maybe it was in the, let me just say my question. Maybe I did see this somewhere. Do we have an item that does address implementation of plans, funding for implementation somewhere in this mix?
Yeah, yes, we do. Maybe Bryn can point out the number, but it was the one with the really big price tag that also included our grant funds for projects. So Bryn, what is that?
There it is.
Is that item U?
Yeah, it looks like you. Okay, I see it. I was thinking I'd seen it, but I couldn't find it when I was asking the question. Okay.
Chair Reeves, I think it's important to clarify, maybe I misheard you. If we're talking about implementation of plans in regards to funding specific projects, that is one of the ones that we cut, because for several reasons. We put it out there as it's something that we have heard from folks is having an interest, some folks. At the same time, we don't actually have authority to carry it forward. And if it's a competitive grant program, we would need statutory authority for that. So that one is on the cuts list. If you are talking about something that is in terms of like the plan coordination and continuing after a plan is developed, that is in the planning POP. If we talk about though planning implementation, there is funding available for folks to go and apply through our existing programs, and they will score. Part of the scoring does give preference or give points for projects that were developed as a result of a collaborative planning effort. So Senate Bill 839, for example, or our water project grants and loans does provide that. So currently the avenue is in order to get funding for specific projects, folks would need to go and apply to an existing state agency program.
Okay, so, well, here's where I was headed with this. We had several meetings. We have had several meetings in which we've heard from participants in the place-based planning program, and the questions to us, to the commission, were things like, what's the significance of us getting your approval? Does it get us a leg up in implementation? Where is the funding for implementing this plan that we've come up with? And so what I'm really getting at is, are we proposing anything to answer those questions, I guess? And it sounds like we're—
Chair Reeves.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yep. Again, Tom Byler. You're raising it, so I want to be careful with our language about this, because this has been something that we're starting to talk about a fair bit in the work group environment that we're not really talking about as much here with our agency budget. And that is that there are discrete phases that are associated with trying to help communities achieve and realize their intended water future. And you could get into terminology about kind of pre-planning. You can get into the planning investment area. One area that I think we've just been talking about is moving from your completed plan to try to develop actual projects from it, which is this kind of post-plan, pre-project phase, which has been a kind of a gap for many folks or many interests who are trying to move forward from a planning phase to a project implementation. How do you get from that point? And it takes a lot of resources to get there. And the state hasn't been a strong funder of that kind of area. And then there's, of course, the project implementation funds, which tend to be something that the legislature blesses and provides ample funds for. Then, of course, there's kind of adapting and monitoring and all of that at the tail end. So there are these various phases. These phases are things that the Regional Water Planning Work Group is looking at in earnest. And they're really looking at that more systemic architecture of how you get from nothing to projects that help communities for their long-term water needs. Our efforts are more oriented around our existing programs, informed by the place-based planning assessment, which identifies some of the issues that I was just talking about. But we have not put the same type of energy into those conversations as the regional work group, in part because of the regional work group. But we have been putting some time into the conversations around place-based planning, when we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the legislative concepts.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for that. Let me just see if we have any other input from other commissioners on the tiers or any questions. I do not see any other hands up.
Chair Reeves,
Yes.
So can you hear me?
Yes, Commissioner Mall.
Yeah, sorry, I
Go for it.
apologize. I had to transfer to phone. Is the sound quality okay?
Yeah, it's good. I can hear. How's the somebody? Tom, can you hear? Okay. Are you able to hear, Joe? I think you're okay, Joe.
Yeah, no, I can hear fine.
Okay.
Okay. So just a couple of things. I really appreciated Raquel's reminder of the sausage making that is going from this list of potential projects through the legislative choices, through the governor's office choices, through ultimately the legislators' choices. I think with that in mind, something, Chair Reeves, that you said about, I'm not sure that that OWRD even really needs to be the home of the drought czar or whatever you want to call it. I would argue strongly that it does, and that's just one example of what I would like to see the department. I want you all to feel as confident as you can going forward in a sort of a leadership standing position before the governor's office and the legislature, to say, yeah, this is our priority. We are at the center of this, and these are the things that we see as needing to happen. I feel like with the 100-year water vision, we were perhaps a little more passive relative to some of the other agencies. And I think there's some confusion that, given the amount of money that has been invested in the department through ARPA and in infrastructure and what's happening, the importance of showing continued momentum and confidence and leadership in that going forward, to get at Commissioner Wolf's recognition that on the ground implementation is really going to make the difference. I think that what I'm hearing, at least in this top to budget process, there's a place for the department to really step up and express itself along those lines. So I would want to encourage thinking about the tiers in that way. If there's a way, like like Chair Reeves, I don't want to say specific this, but not specific that, take this in. But if you could really look at it from the perspective of the integrated water resources strategy and tie it in the narrative or however it gets presented, I think that would go a long way. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Let's see. I do not see any other commissioners or hear any other commissioners with input on this.
Chair Reeves, I see Commissioner Quimps has his hand up.
Oh, I didn't see that. Thank you. Commissioner Quimps, please.
Thank you, Chair Reeves. So a couple of thoughts, looking at the extensive list, and thank you for putting this together. I know it's a challenge to organize this much information. A couple of things that kind of stick out to me is that the titles are kind of a mix of, sometimes they're goal-based, sometimes they're means-based, like, you know, what is the means to the goal, and the goal isn't stated so much, like, you know, improving water management could be increasing the number of, it's a long title, but increasing the number of water masters to improve water management, for example. And then it would have more consistency with some of the other titles. But trying to have consistency in the approach to titling these, I think, would be helpful. And, you know, I tend to think of work in terms of broad categories of strategic planning, the operations, which is implementing the plans, evaluating the work, and reporting, which should include also outreach and education. So maybe grouping the work functionally would be helpful, and trying to see if the different tiers, whether or not they have those different functions are kind of equitably represented. And maybe they don't need to be, but, you know, on the other hand, maybe they do. I also did a quick search. I looked for things like, you know, another way that you might title something is protect water rights or enforce water rights, which would include things like collecting data, getting more water masters and things like that. So it's a, you know, an active verb that gets at a key department function. And if I do a search of this document for protect water rights or enforce water rights, I don't have anything come up. You know, and that seems like a key function. Data collection and management can relate to the hydraulic cycle, in-stream flow, surface storage, groundwater. You know, trying to adapt to climate change. So maybe trying to group some of these in larger kind of baskets, if you will, of functions would be helpful. And and then I'm also curious how that might play with the different audiences that are going to see this besides just the commission. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Quimps. That seems like a really good idea. I just want to jump in on that. However, to organize this in that way might kind of bring it to life a little bit more. I'm looking at this table of contents and thinking of it as grouped that way. That could really could make a difference in terms of how people receive it and recognize the importance of it, of the, you know, specific items and categories. Let's see.
Chair Reeves, commissioners, if I might respond to those comments around the titling. It's a great time to bring up titles because we have learned from the budget instructions that titles must be 45 characters, including spaces. So that's actually not very long if you type out 45 characters with spaces. So a lot of you are going to get shorter. And so I bring that up just so you all know that if the titles change and you love the title, but it was really long, it's because it doesn't fit into the budgeting system. So that is something that we will be looking to change over time. We've tried to make the titles so that folks generally know what the topic is. I will say that we have gone back and forth in terms of combining POPs and then splitting them apart. We did find that some of the POPs that we combined, folks really didn't like that. And So we've been in a little bit of that dance in terms of how we present the information here today. It is presented in a way that is necessary for a discussion around prioritization. It's not necessarily presented in a manner that is conducive to talking about here's the different buckets that we are working in. And we've had other formats for other purposes where we have used that more, here's the different kind of buckets that we're working in. And I do think that is a good framework for going forward. It's just in this part of the budget process where we do have to put a number to each one of these. We wanted to make sure that you could see, okay, where are we putting each one of these? So I appreciate the feedback on that. And certainly if there are ones that you do think we should be combining, we're happy to make those considerations as well.
Thank you, Raquel. Do we have an Commissioner Kahara?
Okay, yeah, I just want to echo a lot of what was mentioned already. I am very happy to see that we're doing a match with, or proposing a match with the Open ET, Agromet, and Snowtel. I know with Agromet, there's usually a cost share on the, the initial, installation. And then there's oftentimes a contract match for ongoing maintenance of that station. Unless that has changed since I retired, that's kind of how that works with the Agromet stations. And that includes somebody going out and visiting each station at least once a year to make sure everything's working properly. I do think that the adapting to climate change and drought should be somewhat higher priority, although does it go to the top? No, I don't think so, but does it fit more in 4 or more in 3? I don't know. It's one of the things I remember from my water conservation that we used to call the hydrogeological cycle. That when you don't have water, everybody's focused on drought and how do we get more water and how do we get more water? And then you get a flood and everybody forgets about the drought and not having any water because you've got too much water. And so all your work is then focused on getting the water, rid of the water. And so it's just back and forth and back and forth. And it would be nice to, okay, let's step out of that for a bit and know that drought is the more common problem that we have. And we should be focusing on that more continuously rather than, doing the flip-flop back and forth. Other than that, I am amazed the amount of work that you guys have put into putting this together. It's a fantastic list that covers all the things that we could be doing if we only had the money and the staff. And that's all I've got.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, that is quite a list. It would be good if we could, it would be great if we could do everything on this list. I am not seeing any other commissioners who would like to weigh in. Bryn, are we ready to move on to the second part of the agenda or of the presentation, or what would you like to do?
Chair Reeves, members of the commission, we can either flip over to public comment on just the POPs, or we can jump into LCs. I know that we are running short on time, so I will let you decide what you think makes the most sense.
Yeah,
in terms of flow.
Yeah, I think we should probably go ahead into the legislative concepts because we're 20 minutes away from when we were announced public comment. So let's do that.
Perfect. That sounds great. Okay,
Thanks.
so let's jump into it then. Again, for the record, Bryn Hudson, Legislative Coordinator for the Water Resources Department. So we're going to transition into our proposed legislative concepts. We have 4 in front of you today. The first proposal is on transfers of stored water, and as it stands, so as you will read in the attached bill language, the bill directs the agency to study laws related to changes to the location and point of diversion of a water right that authorizes the storage of water. So I do want to flag, this is the typical bill language that we use when we have a concept that we want to serve as a bill vehicle for any potential solutions that may be developed later on in the year. As a reminder, House Bill 3103 that was passed during the 2021 session directed us to work with stakeholders to develop a solution, as well as criteria for approving transfers of the location and point of diversion of storage rights. So we are working on getting a group stood up to facilitate and actually discuss the solutions, as well as those criteria and sideboards that come along with approving those transfers. And so this legislative concept essentially just serves as a potential bill vehicle in the event that that work group comes to a potential solution and has some legislative language ready to go. So that is what this bill is. We do not intend to do a study on the laws. For all intents and purposes, it's a bill that just is meant to be ready to go in case other ideas come up as it relates to transfers of stored water. The next LC is another study bill. So similar structure, and this is around our department fees. So this one is basically around alternative strategies to funding programs that are currently supported by fees at the department. So again, this concept will serve as a bill vehicle for any potential solutions that might be reached. And again, as a reminder, in the 2021 legislative session, we received funding to facilitate a work group to evaluate and identify future funding mechanisms for the department's fee-supported programs. So again, this is just essentially a bill vehicle in the event that once we get that work group up and running, if a consensus is reached or a solution is reached, this legislative concept would basically serve as the vehicle to move those ideas forward. So the department fees and the transfers of stored water bills are basically ready to be gut and stuffed bill. Our next legislative concept is around split season leasing. So that's a current existing program at the department, and it basically allows a water right holder to apply to the department to be able to use water under an existing water right during part of the season and then lease the water right in stream during the other part of the season, or vice versa. So our authority for this program sunsets on January 2nd of 2024. And this legislative concept is proposing to make the program permanent, while also repealing an existing provision stating that water rights cannot be enrolled for more than 10 years under this program. So if there's a 10-year cap basically on how many times a person can participate in this program, we're proposing to remove that cap while also making the program permanent. And I will flag that, while we have some policy priorities for the agency, we are still working with interested parties and continuing conversations on this bill in particular with stakeholders to ensure that we're all in a good shape when we hit legislative session. The next LC is a big one. This one is on water planning. So as Tom or Raquel alluded to, I can't remember who, our existing authority to provide funding for place-based integrated water resources planning sunsets July 1st of 2023. Additionally, the funding and the authority for that funding is limited to place-based planning and does not allow for more flexible planning work. We have heard from a variety of avenues, place-based planning groups, the Drought Task Force, a lot of lessons learned that we need a more flexible planning branch of the agency. So what our current legislative concept proposes is to establish a fund that would allow and provide for grant dollars for things like pre-planning situational assessments, water system or water conservation and management planning, drought contingency planning, continuing place-based integrated water resources planning, resources for community capacity building in areas that might not necessarily historically have been engaged or have community capacity to give to planning efforts. And then also this piece that we've been talking about around implementation coordination of state recognized place-based integrated water resource plans, so that those dollars to take groups from the planning to implementation phase, not necessarily dollars for projects, but dollars to keep the groups together and can continue the momentum forward. So we are in the really, really early stages in developing this LC. We held a workshop at the beginning of May, and it was a pretty well-attended and large workshop. And basically, we just tried to gather as much input as possible to figure out what the next steps were and where we needed to go on this. We received a lot of feedback. Some folks thought that the LC was too broad. Others were supportive. So folks are pretty split on that. So it is our intention to continue conversations similar to split season leasing on this with interested parties to work to get folks to kind of engage with this LC with the acknowledgement that we do have the regional state-supported regional water planning and management work group also doing work on this. So we know that there's a lot of existing and parallel work going, but we are taking advantage of this opportunity to ensure that there is a vehicle to keep planning alive at the department. But again, really early stages of this LC. We anticipate many, many conversations moving forward on this LC in particular. So that's all I've got on the LCs. I know that was kind of a lot of information, but I want to open the floor for any questions, comments, input, feedback that you all might have on the 4 legislative concepts that you have heard today.
Thank you, Bryn. Just looking. Well, I have one question while people are thinking about this. On the fee LC, and maybe there isn't one, but do you have an example of what such an alternative might be? I mean, and if you don't worry about it. I mean, it's a study, just to study this. So, but I'm just, I think of legislative funding and fee support, and I'm not sure what else is out there that people have in mind for this. So I was curious about it.
Commissioner Reeves, this is
Yes.
Tom Byler. I don't care to speculate on that, just
Okay.
because we haven't had conversations with folks around that question.
Okay.
But I think the question that you're raising is a good one from the standpoint that there's general funds, there's federal funds, there's
Right.
fees, and then what? Which
And
is
what else is there?
yeah. So it does raise some big questions that this group we'll need to form the group and start wrestling with those questions. But I don't want to
Okay.
speculate before we even form the
Sure.
conversation.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. I'm scrolling to see if other commissioners do not see any other questions. I have no questions myself about these concepts. So maybe we are ready to move to public comment. Do we have any more on this agenda item?
Chair Reeves, nope, that is the end of our presentation. So I appreciate
Okay.
you all for bearing with me. That was a lot of me yammering away at you. So I will stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other.
Okay.
And I think we can just jump right into public comment.
Okay. Bryn, I thought you did a great job of yapping away about all that stuff. It was really succinct, and I appreciate that. So let's see, let me just check. See, I got to get back to my public comment list. Okay, so we have 4 people who would like to make public comment, and I'm going to call them just in the order they are in on my screen, which is first is Matt Bromley from the Desert Research Institute.
Hello.
Hello,
Can you hear
Mr.
me all right?
Bromley? Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I'll go ahead and start. I appreciate the chance to speak with you today. As a scientist with the Desert Research Institute, I've been fortunate to collaborate on research in Oregon on several occasions. Today, I'm speaking to you as a member of the OpenET Consortium. The OpenET team is grateful for the support proposed within the Water Supply Monitoring Policy Option Package for OpenET, Agromet, and SNOTEL funding. OpenET is a nonprofit collaborative that utilizes the best available science to develop satellite-based evapotranspiration data that is publicly accessible. OpenET appreciates the opportunity to work over the next biennium to help ensure that evapotranspiration, or consumptive water use data, is available to inform a broad range of water resource management activities across Oregon, including basin-scale groundwater management following the implementation of HB 2018. Public support in Oregon would enable the OpenET team to engage with the Water Resources Department, growers, communities, water managers, and extension specialists to provide education and training and discuss applications of the data. OpenET would also work in collaboration with these stakeholders to conduct additional ground truthing and inter-comparison studies. This allows us to improve the models and ensure that the data are viewed as reliable and trusted information. Additionally, this funding support would enable us to enhance features within OpenET like short-term ET forecasting and expanded integration with irrigation scheduling tools developed by extension agencies across the Pacific Northwest. Equal access to ET data can foster greater collaboration between state agencies and communities across Oregon to develop and implement innovative water management solutions. In particular, OpenET can help farmers, ranchers, and water managers in at least 3 ways. First, OpenET can help them better understand water needs and water use to facilitate locally driven water planning and management efforts. Second, it can be a cost-effective approach to track how changes in irrigation practices are helping to achieve water conservation goals. And third, OpenET can help communities explore flexible solutions, such as incentive-based conservation. OpenET is already being used to help inform and shape local solutions to water challenges in Oregon and across the West. In all of these applications, a common goal is to identify solutions that balance water supply and demand while supporting sustained agricultural production in vibrant rural communities. As water supplies come under more stress from a variety of pressures, it will be increasingly important to have a strong understanding of water use. OpenET is an important tool that can better enable the state to support regional planning and management efforts and give farmers and water managers and communities the data they need to develop locally driven solutions. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today.
Thank you for coming to speak with us, and we have your letter as well. Any questions from any commissioners? Thank you, Matt.
Excellent, thank you again.
Okay, let's see. Next up, Kimberly Priestley from Water Watch.
Yeah, I can't see myself, so hopefully I'm up. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Good afternoon, Chair Reeves, members of the commission. My name is Kimberly Priestley, and I'm here representing Water Watch of Oregon. Water Watch is a river conservation group that works to protect and restore stream flows statewide. Water Watch has participated in the department's budget and legislative stakeholder meetings and has provided comments to the departments at various junctures. As to the budget POPs, we've submitted comments on each POP, so I'm not going to go through all those today. But I did, however, want to note our broad support for the POPs related to both generating and improving access to data, as well as those bolstering water management, whether in Salem or on the ground. We think these should be priorities for the agency. We are just seeing the prioritization document, so still sorting through all that. But I would flag that we do have concerns that some of the POPs that would enable core data and management functions of the department, such as B, Water Masters, and G, which is updating the water availability model, seem too far down the list. We also wanted to note one area of concern, and that is the merging of POP ZA and ZC. Our position on the water planning POP is relevant to our comments on the budget. So I'll briefly dive into the LC and then move back to the POPs. Long story short, from our perspective, the planning LC is much too broad and undefined. Aside from the one section that extends the existing place-based planning language in subsection 6, the LC doesn't set forth any standards or criteria for this funding. There's no public benefit requirement or requirement that both in-stream and out-of-stream needs be addressed. Balanced representation is not required, nor are there measures to ensure that planning be transparent or accountable. You know, we have many other concerns, but to keep it short, I'll just say that from our perspective, the LC is inconsistent with the long-standing pathway on place-based planning, as well as the current regional work group discussions that are focused on regional and/or basin scale planning. You know, our recommendation as to the planning document is that both the LC and the relating clause be narrowed to address the sunset of the place-based planning and the discussions that center on that. So jumping back to the POPs, so we are concerned with the merging of POP ZA and ZC. ZA basically would enable the planning LC, which I just discussed. You know, and as noted, there have been concerns raised not just by WaterWatch, but by a spectrum of users on this idea. You know, but on the flip side, POP ZZ, there's been a pretty broad support of that, is my understanding. And basically that would provide funds to develop data and access to data for planning and or otherwise. You know, and this is something that was identified in the place-based planning assessment, the need for data before conversations. And so again, you've got ZA, which a lot of people have concerns with, ZC, which is pretty widely supported. And, you know, prior to this meeting, those were different POPs, but in this document, they are merged. And as far as I can recall, that merging was not raised in any stakeholder meetings to date. And, you know, it just seems contrary to the discussions. And we would, you know, and I think ultimately the assessment is that these are very, very different concepts. And by combining them, you risk one for the other. And I think the combination of the two will also lead to pretty confusing conversations with legislators because they are so different. So from our perspective, we would urge the commission and the department to uncouple these two concepts so that they can live or die on their own individual merits. And I think with that, I know we're running up against time, so I will close with that. But just really appreciate, I did want to close by saying I really appreciate the outreach and work of the department. They really, you know, work very hard to engage stakeholders. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Kimberly. Do we have any questions for any commissioners with questions? Okay, next we have Peggy Lynch, the League of Women Voters. Hi, Peggy. Hi. Welcome.
Chair Reeves and members of the commission, thank you very much. And Director Byler and staff. Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon, Natural Resources Coordinator for the Action Team. This incredible work with the proposed tiers, your staff is an excellent first step. Your staff continues to shine, but one good session and they go crazy. Seriously, the League looks forward and to continue to work and engage with the agency and the agency's budget. We have shared that we first support following up on the 21-22 budget work, the staffing and programs. It sounds as if Tier 1 reflects that goal. Second, we appreciate Commissioner Mall's comments on the DEI POP because we continue to push for linking water resources POPs with other agencies. 3, we appreciate Commissioner Smitherman's and others' comments on data. there are a number of POPs related to getting more data. And we need to rely on the agency to select them in the implementation order so that we can get the most data for the most bucks to be able to do the most work. Then we appreciate multiple commissioners commenting and recognizing the importance of POP A, the Climate and Drought Initiative. And ZA fits into that category as well. I would note that we do have an OCRI, an Oregon Climate Change group, and that DLCD was the lead agency in charge of creating a climate resiliency document with lots of state agencies. Again, a multiple agency work group. So again, as I support this agency, I want to make sure that multiple agencies work together, and your water core team perhaps can help with that. As to the LCs, we appreciate being a part of House Bill 5006 work group, and we look forward to working on any LC that addresses the planning and funding. And we believe that it should be a multi-agency effort, as was the IWRS. Lastly, just a comment on the overall budget process. The agency will have to advocate for the governor's recommended budget, but advocates like LWBOR can use the ARB when providing input to the legislature. So we are hopeful that the agency will provide the best possible ARB with a broad set of goals and initiatives, so that those of us who do engage with the legislature have an opportunity to share those POPs, even if they don't show up in the governor's recommended budget. Thank you all for your work. I really appreciated all the comments that the commission made today. Obviously appreciate the staff. Thank you for your time, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Peggy. Do we have commissioners with questions? And thank you also for pointing out that the league can advocate for, it doesn't have the same constraints, I guess, that the agency does. So that document could be important in that respect too, the agency requested. Okay, we have one more person who has requested comment. James Fraser from Trout Unlimited.
Yes, Chair Reeves, members of the commission, and Director Byler. My name is James Fraser, and I'm the Oregon Policy Advisor at Trout Unlimited. TU is a nonprofit organization dedicated to conserving trout and salmon in their habitats. I'm providing public comment today to provide TU's enthusiastic support for the department's legislative concept on split season leasing. TU has been engaged in the department's stakeholder meetings on legislative concepts and policy option packages, including the subgroup that's been discussing this LC in particular. We really appreciate the department's prioritization of this important issue. TU agrees with both ending the sunset on the program and eliminating the 10-year cap on the period for which a water right may be approved to engage in a split season lease. The split season leasing program was initially authorized by the legislature in 2001, and this is the third time it has faced a sunset, with the former sunset dates being 2008, 2014, and now 2024. Split season leases are an important voluntary mechanism by which willing lessors and lessees place water in stream for the benefit of fish and other ecological values. The program allows flexibility to water right holders in using their rights without causing injury or enlargement. Our organization engages in the program, and we've found it to be a valuable tool for working collaboratively with landowners to benefit fish. TU has staff that work with landowners on these deals, particularly in Northeast Oregon. I want to relate to the commission that our staff has had to not pursue renewals of certain split season leases because they'd hit the 10-year cap on eligibility and shorten the term of leases applied for, so those didn't go past 2024. The changes proposed by this legislative concept will address those limitations and allow this valuable tool to remain available to lessors and lessees. So just in closing, I want to emphasize our appreciation for department staff, both in the field and that work with us on the transactions, and the policy staff that are working on this legislative concept. Split season leasing is an important tool to keep in the toolbox for Oregonians. I look forward to staying engaged in the conversations about this split season leasing legislative concept, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, James. Any questions from commissioners? We appreciate you coming to speak with us and staying engaged. So thank you. So that was our last public comment commenter, and I believe that is the end of our meeting, and that we are adjourned. And we'll see you in June.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye, all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.